Not about. We're live. What happened this week? Just another typical week around the NFL, another typical week in our country. But it's a typical week here on Sunday morning, except Jason Wood will not be joining us on assignment. And but we do have DFS Donuts, Mitch Carl, so we're going to get a little extra takes from him on the DFS front. And of course, Dr. Jene Bramel. And if we missed you on Thursday night, we just wanted to really allow you to concentrate on that masterpiece of football on Thursday night. And we'll catch you up on injury news around the league. Gene, let's start with the Seattle running back situation. Chris Carson, Carlos Hyde, if we looked at it on Wednesday, we would have thought Hyde was more likely to play. That is flipped, but what does that still mean about Carson's viability today in lineups, even though he's going to be active?
I think a few things. One, this morning, Ian Rappaport sort of confirmed what we all suspected was that Carson had a mild MCL sprain. That can be a difficult injury for a running back to play through. But the fact that they cleared him to full practice on Friday means that they were willing to expose him to some contact. And Pete Carroll seemed pretty optimistic that he'd be able to go. News this morning is that Carlos Hyde, even though Carroll said that they just really want to expose him to contact and he did everything else, is that he may be trending doubtful. Hyde may be. And with the Seahawks not elevating anybody else at the running back position to their active roster yesterday, that would suggest that if they had any concern about Hyde through the week, that they may not have exposed Carson to much, or at least had a backup plan in place. And that doesn't seem to be the case. So Carson looks like he is full go today. Always some risk of aggravation, or that he doesn't feel as stable when he's going full speed against uncertain contact. But he looks like he's ready to go. And I think we need to have some concerns about Hyde, at least if he's active. Maybe they only use him as sort of a in case of emergency break glass situation.
All right. Travis Homer is an interesting name. And I don't know, maybe we'll see Marshawn Lynch again. Gene. It's only week 4. And,
I'd be fine with that. I think Marshawn is smart enough to know that probably this is not the season to come back.
Exactly. But, just looking ahead, potential long-term instability with two of these running backs hurt. Mitch Carl. Mitch, you're a pro, man. Getting limbered before the show. Got to keep our brains limber for this week, Mitch. Last week it was Seattle, Dallas, and sure enough, if you concentrated around that game in DFS lineups, you were rewarded. This week it's Seattle, Miami, which is fun because we have Ryan Fitzpatrick on the other side. He's not going to shy away from this challenge of keeping up with Russell Wilson's cooking. On the Seattle side, it's more straightforward, although we can talk about Chris Carson if you want. What about on the Miami side? Because there's Preston Williams, there's Mike Gesicki, there's Devontae Parker, there's Myles Gaskin, who certainly fits the mode that this game is going to be in. What do we think about this game from a DFS standpoint?
Yeah, so thank you very much for having me here again, and to the viewers, I appreciate y'all having me here every week. I look forward to this time to being able to hang out with everyone. So thank you very much. I don't know if I've said that before, but I'm humbled to be here. So thank you very much, Sig, for inviting me back. When I had looked at this game, I said to myself, I don't care if Chris Carson is active or not. He's completely irrelevant to me this week. And when I'm looking at the Miami defense, I understand we're looking at small sample sizes, but boy, oh boy, have they been absolutely shredded by opposing passers this year. They've given up 1,292 passing yards. That is 415 yards more than the third place team and over 240 yards away from the second worst pass defense in the NFL. I said 400 yards. That's correct, by the way. Over 400 passing yards more than the Texans in third. And 430 yards passing per game through 3 weeks. My friends, that's not good. And now they're facing the potential MVP caliber Russell Wilson with, an emerging DK Metcalf as long as he can hold on to that football as he enters the end zone. A guy like that's going to have multiple touchdown upside every single game. He's similar to like a Kenny Golladay to me. Always red zone potential. Always will get red zone targets. He's big, he's strong, he's fast. And then Tyler Lockett, the ever-efficient wide receiver, will continue to get peppered with targets this year, as I think we're kind of seeing what we've all wanted for years now. And that's Russell Wilson being completely unleashed offensively. And they're asking him to shoulder the load and be the guy in between the 20s, be the guy inside the 20s. And for now, it's just I'm all over the passing game. And Chris Carson, if you want to include him for DFS purposes, by all means do so. But I think he's been priced up to a point where I'm not totally comfortable paying for him over other players when there's others with immense upside and higher floors, in my opinion, at similar price points, maybe even a little bit more, and a few guys I think at cheaper price points as well. Now, on the Miami side, I kind of like all of them to some extent if we're talking about a large game stack, and I think you nailed all the correct pieces, Bloom. It's Preston, it's Devontae, and of course Gaskin now. He's so cheap on DFS at 5.4K, I think, on DraftKings. He's 5.6 on FanDuel. Just dirt cheap for a guy who's going to probably touch the ball 20 times. And even in a part-time role in the first couple weeks, we were seeing him return solid yardage on his touches. And if you're going to say, okay, even if he only gets 15 rushes and this game turns into, a pass-heavy comeback mode, all right, I think Gaskins is still going to catch 4 to 6 passes out of the backfield, and that's maybe a conservative projection. That Fitzpatrick can keep the offense moving between the 20s at least. I don't know if they can get into the end zone all day, but that ball will keep moving. And I think there's also potential as well if you want to fade the Miami Dolphins side and just use all those offensive pieces from Seattle, and then use their defense too. I mean, this is just one of those spots. I love Seattle everywhere.
And it is Jamal Adams out this week, Gene, and Byron Jones returning for Miami.
Yeah, that seems to be the case. Yeah,
and but I would think that on Jones would match up better with Lockett, Howard on Metcalf. It's going to be fun, and I know it's ridiculous to look ahead right now, the times we're in. But Week 9 is Buffalo and Seattle, so I really, really hope we get to see that game.
That's the MVP battle.
Yeah, exactly. That's the other quarterback who's getting to cook. And this is a fun one. Gene, DeAndre Hopkins blocked me like 6 years ago. So I can't even see what he's saying about whether he's going to play today or not. So I have to rely on you.
I forget every time you say that. It makes me chuckle, and I forget that happened every time. So he didn't actually say anything. He just sort of put a tweet out there that said all the fantasy folks wondering if I'm going to play, and he sort of just shared a picture of him rubbing his hands together in front of the camera, which to me, I take as a positive sign. In addition to the fact that almost every time Hopkins has been injured, and says he wants to play, he plays and plays relatively effectively. So Cliff Kingsbury was really the only throw cold water on this potential during the week when they said they really want to roll him out there unless he was full strength. But we know Hopkins will play if he feels like he can be effective. The general manager, Steve Keim, said that, Hopkins doesn't miss games. I don't know why that would be said on Friday unless there was at least some indication that it was possible. It just puts your player in a tough situation if he's not going to play. There are some of all the players that are considered questionable. He was the one that got the most lukewarm tweet from Schefter and Rappaport this morning where they said they wanted to at least put him through pregame warmups. But whatever the ankle injury is, and it's not clear, he played 94% of his team's offensive snaps last week. There really didn't seem to be any issue in the postgame press conference on Monday. There's not a lot of contact that happens on Monday and Tuesday leading up to the practice week there. So I don't have a huge amount of concern here because of the tempered expectations from Schefter this morning. I think you have to wait and see what these pregame reports look like here in the next hour or so before inactives come out. But I think if he's active, you can reasonably trust that, maybe we don't get a 15 target, 10 catch ceiling expectation game from him today, but he should be productive and effective in at least some form or fashion.
Mitch, let's talk chalk. Well, maybe he's not chalk. I don't have my finger on the pulse of the DFS world like you do, but every running back that's played Carolina this year has had his best game of the year. Is it Kenyon Drake today, or is this one to fade?
Yeah, so Kenyon Drake absolutely in play for DFS purposes. The chalk Drake week was actually last week, so this week doesn't look like he's going to be uber chalk, I should say. He still will be very popular. You did nail that for sure. This week, I think truly the chalk's going to be just Kamara, man. Everybody's all over him. I think I've been hearing a lot about Delvin Cook as well due to, the poor defense on Houston's side, giving up 150 yards per game on the ground. 188 yards per game on the ground. It's just, there's some bad defenses for some good opposing running backs this week. Even James Robinson's being talked up as being kind of chalky today at running back due to the poor Bengals defense, giving him 185 yards on the ground per game on the ground. And, I think with some of these cheaper running backs, that might lend itself to being a very solid GPP play this week in using Kenyon Drake. And I think if the DFS 101 in tournaments, whatever the crowd's doing, whatever the field is doing, go the other way. Go the other way, especially if you're playing these really really large tournaments. So if the field is hopping off Kenyon Drake and they're jumping all over these other running backs, well, then maybe it is the week to go back on Drake, especially if we have no clear-cut read on the passing game. And we don't know if Kirk's going to be 100%. We don't know if Hopkins is going to be 100%. Just listening to the talented Mr. Bramel there, I don't know exactly what I want to do with those wide receivers because I don't feel confident. I don't feel confident there. So is this the week where I'm plugging in Murray, Kyler with his wide receivers? I don't know if I can do that. So I think the play might be to roll out Kenyon Drake at lower ownership, probably the lowest we've had all year, and hope this is the week that he absolutely splashes.
Fascinated at all, Mitch, with DJ Moore or Robbie Anderson with Gene, both starting safeties out? Maybe Isaiah Simmons will be back there this week for the Cardinals?
Yeah, I heard that earlier this week. We'll see if that happens or not. That would be interesting for sure. He hasn't gotten much playing time at linebacker.
So, Mitch, it's must-see TV back there regardless, but is it also a play from the Carolina wide receivers?
Oh, that's a great phrasing, because I think in DFS purposes, I think this game is truly an interesting one. I'm not entirely trustworthy of that Carolina passing game, and I don't like that there's so many mouths to feed there. And truly, it's becoming that. I mean, Mike Davis is starting to rack up, 6 to 8 targets in the last 2 games each. Then you have Curtis Samuel starting to get some extra work out of the backfield, and he did have, I think, 4 or 5 pass targets last week. He's talented, and then you have Robbie Anderson, who is getting a lot more targets than I personally thought he would get at this time. DJ Moore is going to be chalk this week. When I look at volatile situations for chalky players, I don't often use them. It's just if there's somebody who's going to be chalk who I think has a high floor, a relatively high probability of hitting their potential, sure, I'll eat the chalk, no problem. But when you have a guy who I think is going to be in a volatile spot, which I truly think any pass catcher out of Carolina is going to be because of Teddy Bridgewater and the way their offense moves, I don't know if I want to sit on a chalky wide receiver who has a volatile floor and ceiling combination. I think that if you've got a guy at 26% projected ownership, which our current initial projections are at rise or fall for DJ Moore, I don't know if that's somebody I want to eat. I probably will either A, try to leverage that situation by using the lowest owned wide receiver from that offense, or B, use the injury riddled Cardinals defense today, truly. And you can kind of just leverage the entire Panthers offense. If Mike Davis is chalky today, if DJ Moore is chalky today, and you've got 35% of all lineups have either one or both of them, simply just use the Cardinals defense as volatile as they'll be as well. And you leverage an entire third of the entire tournament.
Yeah, I agree with you. Moore has been too volatile week to week. Anderson is the safer play, and we'll see. This could be a good Teddy Bridgewater week. Gene, we never like Saturday additions to the injury report. And we got one yesterday with Joe Mixon. However, everything is positive this morning about his prospects of playing. What about his prospects of playing well, prospects of re-injury? Should we be making sure Giovanni Bernard is not on the waiver wire as a long-term outlook just because of the nature of the Saturday injury report edition?
I'd be more worried about this if this was some sort of muscle strain that maybe occurred on Friday and tightened up further on Saturday that led them to be concerned. But a chest injury, as nebulous as that is, it's probably not something that you would consider to be limiting. If it was a rib situation that didn't get him listed as limited on Friday and didn't occur earlier in the week, I mean, he fully practiced all week. So to hear from a couple of reporters this morning that it's considered a very mild injury, that everybody expects him to go from shortly after the report yesterday all the way through overnight, means that I think you can expect him to play and see his full workload. With regard to Bernard, we're going to know most of what we need to know about the other positions, I think, before that situation happens. If you are stuck and you're not sure how the Kansas City New England situation is going to go, maybe rostering Bernard and continuing to monitor reports. But I think we're getting enough positivity from the Kansas City New England situation right now that you can relatively trust that we'll have a positive outcome Monday night into Tuesday. So I don't think I would be compelled to go get Bernard at this point, and I think you can trust Mixon to play and play effectively.
So, Mitch, from a DFS perspective, these games between bottom third teams, bottom third defenses, well, we saw one Thursday night, and we had a 37-28 score. So sometimes the dam can break. We certainly have good enough quarterback play on both sides. I guess the fascinating points pressure points for me are with DJ Chark back. And Gene, DJ Chark off the injury report, like the best news we could possibly have looked for if you're looking at Chark today.
Yeah, last Thursday was a little bit of an odd situation. We weren't really sure exactly how that progressed to where Thursday was a no-go for him, but the extra 10 days and then off the injury report after a full Friday practice should be good to go.
So, Mitch, if Chark was out there on Thursday, that game could have went differently because Chris Conley didn't look great on his deep targets, and I think they even specifically said, the Jags said, not having Chark out there was a big difference. So Minshew as a quarterback against the Cincinnati pass defense, but then on the Cincinnati side, Jacksonville's pass defense, not exactly a winner here. So maybe you're looking at Tyler Boyd. Maybe this is a AJ Green get right game. You fascinated with this one for DFS?
Yeah, I think you really phrase this entire scenario very well. I think it's muddy. It's a muddy situation, right? There's nothing. It's murky. It's murky waters, right? You can't look at this and say, "Well, I love this situation because of this reason," but you also can't look at it and say, "I don't like it at all." I mean, it does have healthy implied team totals on both ends. We're looking at 25.5 points for the Bengals, which is a healthy amount. For a rookie and Joe Burrow leading that offense. And then Jacksonville, their implied team total has bumped up to 23.5 points. I think it opened at 22.5. So, Vegas is saying that this could be a game where both teams are starting to score a little bit. The issue for me, though, Sig, is that there are 9 teams with implied team totals over 27 points in Vegas this week. There are 13 with 25 or more. And when I look at both those teams, I don't find like targeted focus, right? I mean, maybe your Tyler Boyd kind of skirts that, where you can know that he'll get some focused targets throughout the game for DFS purposes. Joe Mixon, yes, he'll get 20 touches. I think he's had 20, 21, and 20 over the last 3 games this season. But what is he doing with those? He's not really doing a lot. And I guess if he doesn't have an opportunity to get into the red zone and score, will he hit his ceiling? I don't know. I don't truly know. Does that mean that this is the spot? This is the game where a tournament can be won? In my opinion, my professional opinion, I don't think so. I think that there's juicier spots today. There's offenses and there's spots where there's a higher probability of hitting their potential. And for me personally, I don't know if I can go down there.
Okay, so I've got you just for a couple of minutes. We'll do lightning round, and then we'll spend some real quality time with Dr. Gene after we send Mitch on his way. Again, folks, DFS and donuts, rise or fall. I think anybody out there who's part of his community already knows, and check it out for sure. Okay, let's talk about some of those juicier spots. Washington's defense without Chase Young, Matt Ioannidis, maybe a house of cards here, but which card is going to hit when we flip them over from the Baltimore offense, Mitch?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. 29.75 point implied team total. They are 14-point favorites. When I look at spots like this, I'm hoping for touchdowns, and that's it. I'm not worrying about yardage or anything like that. Often you're going to get a spot where a team scores, 30 plus. The game is over by halftime, third quarter, and I'm looking at the defense of the Ravens, and I'm looking at Mark Andrews. I think he's the only guy we can truly trust in this offense to potentially score points. Lamar Jackson would have been the other choice, but he's too expensive this week. 8.1K on DK, and he's 9.6K on FanDuel this week. How are you going to pay for him over Dak at 8.2, Josh Allen at 8.6, and Russell Wilson at $9,000? It's hard to pay up for Lamar Jackson, who's not doing current Lamar Jackson things. I don't know if he'll even have to today against the Washington football team.
Mitch, we may end up just saying play players from the Dallas game. It doesn't matter who they're playing. I mean, it's just how it's going so far. How does that apply to a fascinating Browns-Cowboys matchup today?
Yeah, how interesting, right? I mean, who would have thought? But, the Cowboys are playing currently at the fastest pace in the NFL, 76.7 plays per game. They're just fast. They move fast. They get to the line of scrimmage fast. They run a lot of no huddle. They're throwing the ball 65.7% of the time. It is really difficult not to like Dak Prescott at both his price tags on DraftKings and FanDuel this week. And I think there's an opportunity here to plug him in with any of his wide receivers and run it back with Jarvis Landry. I don't know if you want to run it back with Odell Beckham, but he is cheaper than I've ever seen on both sites, at least in recent memory. I think there's game stack appeal here. Yes, it feels weird playing the Cleveland Brown players this week. If you do trust Kareem Hunt and his health, I think he might have some pass catching opportunities today if they are trailing in this game. Until Dallas shows that they can stop a nosebleed, I will be plugging in game stacks galore every single week. With pretty much whomever Dallas is playing. And this week 4 is no different than the first 3 for me.
And then we keep going through this slate, Mitch, and this is where for DFS, it's challenging, but it's also potentially very lucrative because you mentioned maybe the biggest one of them all, the two 0-3 teams voting the loser off the island, Minnesota and Houston. And these defenses, whether it is Houston's run defense or Minnesota's pass defense, it's gasoline on the fire of this game offensively. But again, you've got to make choices. You've got to make choices between this game and other games. You've got to make choices within this game of who you want.
Yeah, and that's the tough thing. I think for me personally is pick the individual pieces you think are most have the highest probability of excelling. And today, for me, that's just use Deshaun Watson, fade his wide receivers. Just, take the upside that he has without trying to figure out who the heck's going to be the benefactor from the passing game. And then use Delvin Cook on the other side, and you can totally have him, going for $150 today, combined yardage. If he scores another couple touchdowns, I believe he has 5 in the season. And if he can score again today with the yardage he's likely going to get, there's a chance for him. And I think he was the call last week by Wood of being that guy who could win you a tournament. And he won bonkers last week as well. And I think he's in a just as juicy spot, potentially the best he's had all year. And he's been playing so well.
Okay. Before we wind up, anything interesting that gets added to that 4 p.m. Eastern slate with the swapping out of Chicago Indy for New England KC?
Anthony Miller was one name that was kind of popping for me this week in my current early projections on our website. And when Nick Foles came in there, he peppered him with 5 targets in that second half, and Miller could have had 2 touchdowns. He dropped one. I don't know if you guys saw that one, but he dropped it. Yeah, he did. He should have caught that 100%. And we saw Anthony Miller have quite the stretch last year, but like a 6-7 games. The kid was so good, and I believe I'm not the best college. I don't remember college very well or what their draft pedigree was, but I remember him being an early round pick. I think might have been an early second rounder, and correct me if I'm wrong. Talented kid. And if he can start putting together, if Foles can move the offense, Foles threw the ball, I think 22 times, and he only played about a half of football. And we saw, actually, I think he threw it 28 times, and Trubisky threw it 22 before he had left. And if that team's going to throw the ball 40 times today, and against a tough defense like the Colts, I still think there's some value to be had there. Both Allen Robinson, Anthony Miller, both affordable this week. I think Zach Pascal on the other side might be kind of sneaky for the Colts. The issue is, do you want to pay up for either Rivers or Nick Foles? I don't know. It's an interesting spot. I think Foles to Anthony Miller, running back with Zach Pascal, is the type of stack I'd be looking to do in a large tournament on DraftKings like the Millie Maker.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see him activate the Matt Nagy offense after they basically said, well, back shoulder throws. Yeah, we can do those now. Who knows what else they can unveil. Last thing to unveil, last quick hit, captain for this showdown slate, the showdown Philly and San Francisco tonight.
Ooh, that's a tough one. That's a really tough one. I think
throw a dart.
Yeah, I think you've got to go with whomever you think is going to rack up the receptions. Truly, we keep seeing on these showdown slates, those wide receivers are supposed to be the play on DraftKings, and on FanDuel, it's supposed to be the quarterback or the running back. But we keep seeing quarterbacks winning everything. There's got to be a regression. I'm using the term that Jason used last week. Regression to the mean, right? We see a high percentage of these showdowns won by the pass catchers. So tonight, I don't know what the answer is. I'll have to dig into it after the main slate here.
Sure, I know.
First initial look, it's a guy like Zach Ertz, who we have not seen pop off, this season. And if he can catch a touchdown, that will already be there with his 6 or so catches for 60 yards. I think he could potentially be the guy. Best guess.
Six catches in the first half, maybe. We always get the first half of our show with Mitch Carl, DFS and Donuts. And it's not just football, folks. If you don't know about Rise or Fall, you need to, because you will rise for sure. I always look forward to us getting to hang out.
Thank you very much, my friends.
Sunday. Yeah, take care.
Best of luck, everybody. Hope somebody wins a millie. Take care.
Yeah. Gene, did you watch the Reds? Did you watch the Reds this week?
Nope, I was at work.
Are you happy to feel spared?
Well, doesn't seem like I missed much hitting, that's for sure.
Building a team that can strike everybody out but can't hit. It's a fascinating blueprint.
Yeah, there was a lot of discussion about the bad luck and shifts of the left-handed hitters and the poor batting average on balls hit and play and things like that. But
I just know we can get a little
one-game sample. None of that matters.
Get a little needle rise. It's funny how Mitch said, remembering college. I was like, how much of college do I remember? I don't know if you ever heard of this, Gene. Where did you get your undergrad degree from?
University of Dayton.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Dayton. Of course, we got Chris Allen on staff, Dayton. The Dayton Flyers. Yeah. All right. Well, let's get back into this, Gene. Terry McLaurin, as you pointed out, and it's great, folks, if you aren't following Gene on Twitter, JeneBramel,
MOUSE.
You lay out some of the things I think that you're thinking about whenever you're projecting these injury situations. And for McLaurin, you laid out that not listed to limited to not participating, his trajectory this week is one of the ugliest, but yet he's expected to play. That still makes it difficult when it's time to set your lineups, what to do with McLaurin in a tough matchup against Baltimore's corners.
Yeah, we never like a soft tissue injury midweek for any player, but specifically a skill position player, and then for them not to be comfortable enough to put him back on the practice field. The other thing I didn't really like going into Saturday night, Sunday morning's report is there was some indication that he did a little bit of light work on an exercise bike and then went over and did some rehab on the side field. And from the only video that we saw of that, it didn't look like he was particularly comfortable doing some deep squats and knee stretches and what have you. And that's, again, I'm always cautious about drawing anything meaningful from video, but when that's the most you have to go by at the time, I was figuring that this was more of a game time decision than maybe even it turns out to be. I think, as per usual, unfortunately this year, McLaurin's probably upside is tied more toward the play of the offensive line and the quarterback position, and whether or not Washington can move the ball or not, how often they extend drives to give him chances to get targets. I think the lack of any sort of context from Schefter and Rappaport overnight, just saying he's expected to play, is about as reassuring as we're going to get. Doesn't seem to be any, well, they want to see how it goes up till game time, see how pregame warmups go, what have you. Seems like they were just being cautious with him on Friday. Obviously, there's no guarantee there. There's some risk involved with a soft tissue injury in the middle of the week, thigh or otherwise. So we'll see how things go. I think you can reasonably expect him to play and to see his usual number of snaps. Whether or not that translates into targets is probably dependent on, does Haskins play well? Does he stay in the game? What's going on with Washington?
Exactly.
So that's probably the bigger issue than his injury right now.
Yeah, and just to be clear for folks out there, so I don't feel crazy too. Because of the talk with Haskins is, and if you look at Ron Rivera's comments, it's impossible to dismiss this, that if Haskins doesn't play well, he's going to be replaced. And it's going to be Allen. Sorry. I'm in like, sitting here under the lights, and it's like I'm thinking I'm talking to Cecil. Dr. Gene. I still feel like I've been saying, if it's Alex Smith, I'm going to have to watch it like a horror movie, like between my fingers. Am I overreacting to what we've seen of Smith so far?
Yeah.
It's a great story, but...
Yes, I would be nervous with Alex Smith in the pocket, knowing his current state of health. I think... I thought it was amazing and wonderful that he was able to make the active roster, but I don't know. I will be crossing my fingers and watching them from behind, watching my eyes from behind the crossed fingers to hope that he comes out of the game okay. And you would think that they would max protect and limit the offense in such a way that Smith would be able to be productive, but I don't know. I still feel like that's unlikely if we get there.
Exactly. And the point is, Kyle Allen in your 2 quarterback superflex leagues. Kareem Hunt, and Gene, mostly due to you, because we've been doing this together for so long, there's patterns, like you talked about the McLaurin pattern as a troubling one. There's patterns to how teams, and we can look at it specifically on a team-by-team basis or coaching staff or medical staff basis. We can also look at it on a player basis. Looking at the Kareem Hunt situation this week, it struck me. So the pattern was he didn't practice Wednesday, Thursday. We heard before he returned to practice Friday, and I think we might have even heard on Wednesday, the injury not believed to be serious. I think it was Mary Kay Cabot who put it out there. Then I believe he was a full participant. I'm not sure if he was full or limited on Friday, but we saw some video that he didn't look limited in whatever the nature of participation was. And it doesn't seem like there's been any question that he's going to play. So I almost look at this one, Gene, as the Browns, while Hunt is not truly 100%, are just managing him. And it shouldn't change his outlook for what could be a big Kareem Hunt afternoon if you think Dallas jumps out to a lead and the Browns have to stay in passing game mode most of the afternoon. How close to my read is your read on the Kareem Hunt situation this week?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. He was limited both Thursday and Friday. Again, another situation where, the practice participation looks a little bit better than some other players with soft tissue injuries. And I think the reassuring reports from some of the local writers and no concern overnight from the national guys that there was any concern about him playing today are as reassuring it gets. Hard to know, though. I don't, again, looking at the video, there was some stopping and starting and a little bit of acceleration and slowing down. Hard to know what to draw from that because so many of these soft tissue injuries respond differently when, we are full speed, epinephrine. I've got too much of Friday still on my mind. Adrenaline running, essentially the same.
Oh, yeah.
Thing, all that stuff going on. So, we'll see how things progress. I'm not too concerned about Hunt right now. Definitely a chance of an in-game aggravation, but I think you can proceed as if that's less likely to happen.
When Mitch was here, we only have so much time. We didn't get a chance to talk about the Chargers and Tampa, but I want to touch on before I launch into some fantasy side of it, Gene. Mike Williams, real quick, and we're looking not so much at players, whether they're going to play this week. Williams is out this week. What's our outlook for him and Chris Godwin with their hamstring injuries that are keeping them out?
Well, I think we know at this point that Godwin's is a little bit of a higher grade situation, hasn't been able to return to practice at all. And there's been every indication that this has the looks of a 3 to 4 week injury rather than something else, with the exception that they haven't chosen to put him on injured reserve. So they're giving him a chance to come back at that 3-week mark. But I don't know that we're just around the corner with Godwin. Williams, San Diego, Los Angeles, the Chargers seem to be, I should just use the team names rather than
right. That's what I do.
The
Chargers. I cheat.
You'd think I'd learn by now. I've been doing this long enough. Chargers aren't really well reported with respect to injuries, so we don't get a lot of information, and we're kind of using practice participation and some other context clues. Williams was on the sideline, didn't return last week, didn't practice at all this week. Again, doesn't have the look of somebody that they've already started the reconditioning process with in any reassuring way. So I would put him doubtful for next week as well. So it'd be surprising to see either Godwin or Williams, I think. I'd maybe give Godwin a little bit better chance than Williams because he's a week ahead of Williams in the recovery process right now, assuming it's a low to mid-grade injury, but kind of doubtful to see both of them.
And what about Fournette? Because Fournette's a good example where, Gene, like last summer, everybody still saw Fournette as a highly injury-prone player. I think there was a false report about him in training camp, and everyone just seized on it like, oh, here we go. And then he was healthy last year, but he does have a history of foot and ankle injuries. How does that play into how we're reading his outlook for the next few weeks?
Yeah, this is just one of the things, on my checklist that I did not get to yesterday and this morning to go back and review that game and to see if I could see where the tweak may have been, if something happened during the game or not, because he seemed to be relatively effective in the second half of last week's game. So I didn't get to that yet. I will try to, depending on how the rest of the day goes before I write for my Monday article, to give us a sense of whether or not there was the appearance of a high ankle injury that maybe he was able to tough it out and play through, and this becomes a 2 to 4 week situation as we've seen with so many others, or if this is, the injuries he's had in the past did not appear to be in that category, but we know those ankles, Fournette's ankles, don't tend to recover as well from even low ankle sprains. So I think that's probably where you would put your expectation at this point, is that it's a day-to-day rather than a week-to-week situation. But hopefully we get a little bit of information from Bruce Arian after the game, and practice participation next week is telling. And then if I see anything, all 22 or otherwise, we'll try to bring it up on Monday or later next week. But I think I'm relatively confident that Fournette will return to practice unless we hear something else from Arians after today's game.
It didn't seem like he was close to playing this week, right, Gene? I mean, with Fournette, he wasn't close to. He didn't practice all week. And
and Bruce Arians very early told a radio host that he's not going to go. So that makes me a little bit nervous about a higher grade injury, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, they just decided we're going to give you a week off. We've got other players that we trust before we brought you on board. Ronald Jones can carry the load. Even with Chris Godwin not there, we're playing well. Hopefully that's all it turns out to be. But yes, it was immediate and definite pessimism from Tampa Bay.
Okay, turning the page to the afternoon games. We also have that New Orleans-Detroit game. And just real quick, Gene, we're going to get into New England-Kansas City before we're done. But real quick on the New Orleans situation. Just based on what you've seen, and I understand if you want to say pass, next question, but do you believe that Michael Burton's positive was indeed a false positive from what you've seen?
Yeah, I think false positives are going to happen. That these tests are not 100% in terms of what they're looking for. The PCR tests are looking for any small fragment of DNA, and sometimes there's going to be a little bit of a false positive. So he had a follow-up PCR test and another rapid test this morning. Apparently, both of them, and they were both resulted quickly in negative. And an asymptomatic player that has a couple of follow-up tests that are negative, and the rest of the team and any close contacts he may have had tested negative a second time as they had done the night before, stands to reason that it's a false positive test. So I think there's reason to trust that that's the case.
Okay, Zach Moss. And it's not so much about Zach Moss, Gene, but it's about Devin Singletary. The Raiders are dragging themselves into this game. The Patriots notched like 200 plus yards rushing against them, really wore them out. And we know this Buffalo offense has been so prolific that even though Singletary wasn't a huge hit last week against the Rams, you still like his prospects if Moss is either a smaller factor or not playing. So we saw limited with a toe, which of course those are the launching pads for these runners. What is the prognosis for Moss in the afternoon game?
I think it's okay. The only piece of meaningful information we got this week was when Sean McDermott told reporters that the situation was improving for Moss. Don't really like toe sprain issues for running backs. It's likely to get aggravated, especially a running back that tends to do most of his damage between the tackles, where he might get pulled back and have that foot kind of hyperextended again, where that toe issue may be. Without knowing how significant the injury is, it's hard to know. I mean, we've seen players return and play through. DeMarco Murray a couple years always comes to mind, where it just seemed like he was going to play through that toe no matter what. Whereas we'll have other issues like Philip Lindsay earlier this year, where the injury is a little bit more significant, harder for him to recover. So I think I lean towards him playing today, whether or not he's healthy enough to get whatever his pre-injury workload may have been. And that, there was such a small sample size that I'm not certain we know exactly what that is. All of that goes into things. So I think it's unlikely that we'll see Moss do anything more from a touches and targets perspective than he did before the injury, but I do expect him to be on the active roster.
John Brown. I love John Brown. It's one of the most underrated players in the game. Not known as a quick healer, Gene. Gets pulled from the game. Yeah, go ahead. Just run with it, because he's playing and he's not on the injury report, but...
So I think one of the issues with John Brown is we know that fatigue and muscle injury stresses his sickle cell trait condition. Not that we expect that to be a primary issue from play to play, but over the years, teams have rightfully, and Brown rightfully, knowing his body well, has been a little bit more cautious in allowing him some extra time to recover. The fact that they took him off the injury report means that maybe they weren't as concerned about his injury toward the end of, well, they were concerned about it, but weren't so concerned after they reevaluated him on Monday and Tuesday after the game ended to limit him in practice. And that as he continued to stress that muscle during the week, it responded as positively as they could have hoped. So for him not to be on the injury report at all in Buffalo is about as reassuring sign as you can get. Now, it doesn't mean that there won't be any aggravations, but and that they won't be cautious should anything come up today, game script wise or otherwise. But all signs suggest that they're planning to use him as they usually would within their game plan.
All right, moving right along. We get to this Philadelphia-San Francisco game tonight, and Deebo Samuel is going to be back. Sometimes the best thing we can do when these players return is not rely on the player that's returning, but downgrade our expectations for everybody else. And in this case, Gene, San Francisco has said he's not going to be on he's not going to be on a pitch count, but he's not going to have his usual role. We do get George Kittle back. We have a split backfield. We expect San Francisco to have success tonight, but it's a tough offense to read with Samuel back, with Ayuk coming off of a big game, Kittle back. What do you expect from Deebo Samuel? And now that he's back on the field, because I was surprised. I thought when he went on injured reserve and the word setback was used, I thought, well, you can rule out week 4. I mean, a setback usually implies we're pushing the calendar back, but indeed it was just them needing that time, and he's conditioned. He started getting conditioned last week. They said week 5 last week. How does this all play into what you expect from Samuel tonight, but more importantly, the potential for this to go wrong based on how they've handled it?
Yeah, so Samuel has a big screw in the foot bone on the outside of the foot, and that's going to take some getting used to. So it's not surprising that there was some soreness there, but there's also a concern when you have hardware in that bone that there's a chance of re-injury, or maybe the bone is not healing as well as you expect it to, even though they gave him a proper amount of time to rest and rehab through the offseason in that first part of the season. So there was good reason to be concerned that it could have been truly an issue where that bone wasn't healing well. But it looks like it turns out to where it just took a little bit of conditioning and some time for him to get used to whatever changes in footwear was necessary, get used to running on that foot again with that hardware in place. And he passed those tests, and practically the Niners, anticipating what's going on this week, brought him all the way out to West Virginia in the middle of their week last week, specifically to get him some practice time with the offense, knowing that it looked like he had been making enough progress that they were targeting this week for his return. So it's also for the same reasons, it's not surprising that he has not been in a full speed game situation yet. So you can't expect him to take 60 to 70 snaps and run 30 to 40 routes right away. What I wrote yesterday was it would not be surprising if he felt really good in condition, didn't have any soreness, didn't have any issues at all in unclean route running situations during the first half, and he felt fine coming out of the game at halftime, that maybe you'd see them increase his work a little bit. But given everything that's happened with the Niners offense over the past couple of weeks, they need all skill position players on deck, and there's really no reason to push things. So I think probably it's a wide range, but 4 to 8 targets. You could see 4 to 5. You could easily see him get 7 to 8. I don't think he's going to be running a ton of downfield routes, so there's not a ton of upside here. What you hope, as you hinted as you started this conversation, is that he passes through this game without any issues at all, feels no soreness on Monday or Tuesday other than the usual aches and pains that you'd expect after playing in a football game, has a full practice next week, and then we're good to go moving forward. That would be the best case scenario, and that kind of reassures you that, what we'll often see when these players try to return in season within that 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 week time frame, that we often have setbacks. He's already been through the soreness phase and the reconditioning, and that we're good to go moving forward from here. So I think that's the best case scenario. I don't think you can entirely rule out a 6 to 10 target game, but I just don't think I would expect that. And if it happens, then you're happy, because that means moving forward there's very little concern.
It's possible, Gene. It's possible, as we start to look ahead to Monday night, that the biggest fantasy headache is not New England, Kansas City, but it's Devontae Adams, Calvin Ridley, and Julio. So as if setting lineups isn't complicated enough, now we have 3 wide receivers on Monday night. Now there are some hedges. There's Marcus Valdes-Scantling, there's Russell Gage. If you put him in a flex, there's Robert Tonyan. There are even Brian Hill or something like that. But if we're to the point where we're talking about using a hedge, we think we're going to need one for Adams or Ridley or Julio, then it adds a whole other layer of lineup calculus that makes your head hurt. Their hamstrings and ankles. I guess with Ridley now, it's a calf. Mm-hmm. We got Adams with a hamstring that cost him a game. We got Julio with a hamstring that cost him a game. Complicating matters. I think this that Green Bay has a bye next week.
Yep.
And as you've chronicled over the years, Green Bay's medical staff is conservative. And if we look at this matchup, it's one that they can probably win without Adams after how well they performed last week. So let's talk about these 3 big-time wide receivers.
Yeah, each one of these has its own set of complicating circumstances. So Julio Jones is still saying he's not 100%, is still saying he's trying to build up confidence, but we know that he routinely plays through any number of soft tissue injuries, and not always effectively. So the fact that going after Thursday's practice and still on Friday, even though we're hearing from Dan Quinn that both he and Ridley are trending up, there are clear signs this week that Jones is not full strength, and that we can't assume that he's likely to go out there and get double-digit targets and play effectively. That is a possible outcome, especially because they've got another day to recover, and it was considered a relatively mild aggravation, allowing him to get back on the practice field this week. But I have some level of nervousness that I think the way I would project this right now is I think Jones is going to be active. I don't expect him to be fully effective, and he may well be limited and see his game end early, depending on any number of factors, how he feels, how the game goes, what have you. So I think as of right now, that's what's most likely to happen with Jones, but I would not trust him to be anything close to his usual self. Ridley's situation, I don't think the ankle was likely a big deal. It was probably somewhat maintenance earlier in the week. Another player like Hopkins, who played essentially every offensive snap last week, didn't appear to be limited in any way. And then we see players, especially in Atlanta, kind of rest on Wednesday. So that wasn't a concern. I think the bigger factor here is the calf situation, and we don't know how significant that was. It was nice to see Ridley back practicing on Saturday. It's even nicer to hear no concern from the local media, and Ridley's condition was barely discussed in the national media at all. So probably a precautionary situation for Ridley. And of all three of these players, I think he's likely the healthiest, even though he had a midweek tweak of some sort going into the game. So I don't have any reason to be worried about him being on the inactive roster or any decreased effectiveness in comparison to the other two. Adams, I think we can tell a story with Adams either way. The positive story with Adams is it always was considered to be a low-grade injury. We know the Packers do not return players until they're fully healthy. Adams earlier this week in his interview was fully on board with that and said he didn't want to return until he felt as he did before the injury. And he said that the Packers have not ruled him out this week in the way that they did last week. So all those are positive signs, and it tells you that if Adams is active, they feel like he's good to go, and you can fully trust him as much as you can trust a player coming off injury in the first week if he's active. The other part of this is they haven't cleared him for a full practice yet. The Packers may not use players if they're not fully healthy. Adams has said he's not going to go out there unless he's fully healthy. And there's a bye week coming. So in most situations, I would probably say a bye week gives players a better chance to play with a mild injury because we know they've got a little bit extra time to deal with the after effects because they know they're going to be a little bit more sore than usual after coming off that injury. In the Packers case, they may well look at that bye week as this is a way to take these extra 14 days, put this injury entirely behind us, and have no concerns moving forward. So I think Adams is trending towards playing, and that will be a good sign. But if there's any concern, if things don't go as well as planned leading up to pregame warmups, there's still a chance that he's going to be inactive. So I think you should plan for that. But of all the three players, Jones is clearly the one that I was most concerned with, but Adams may be the one most likely to be inactive.
Right.
So I know that's kind of confusing, but I think that's where we are because of what the injuries are, how the teams have approached these particular players and these particular injuries on their own previously. So hopefully, I don't know, you can run with that as much as you want to.
Sure.
Hopefully there's enough hedges that you've got a little bit of an option there, given everything else that's going on. Really hard to know what to do with Julio, but I mean, wide receiver 3 with downside, I guess, is where I would tier him at this point. And then Adams is entirely dependent on whether he's active or not.
So keep that in mind, folks, as you're setting lineups today. And of course, one thing that's looming over this week of fantasy football, Gene, is this New England Kansas City situation. Latest is it sounds like there's no additional positive tests that they will play tomorrow night, which from a football entertainment perspective is terrific, except it's Brian Hoyer and not Cam Newton. Real quick before I jump into the more complicated factor, Cam Newton already, they're saying week 5 unlikely. This is a first big name player going on the positive list. What should we be watching for as we hear reports about his condition? And give us as best you can, because this is a new frontier, that range of 4 to 6 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks. What's our initial range for Newton?
Yeah, so it would appear that Newton is not only positive but symptomatic. So that generally portends a longer period of time in which a player is going to test positive. So a symptomatic player on day X, you're very likely to continue to have PCR tests positive for a while. If it's a mildly symptomatic case and he recovers quickly, there does not seem to be a lot of concern that players have to be held out for a period of time. There are some competing recommendations out there, both in the pediatric and adult world, about how long a player or an athlete or anybody that does strenuous exercise should rest and be monitored before they're cleared to play. Anywhere from 5 to 7 days to 2 weeks to they need a workup after 2 weeks have passed and what have you. So the NFL really never specifically said in the way that the NBA said how they would handle a positive case or a symptomatic player. But I think the reason you're hearing reports today that next week would be considered questionable and maybe even doubtful is because he is going to have a negative test or two to prove he's not contagious. If those tests aren't there, then it's a minimum of 10 days of isolation after the symptoms start. And so either one of those would seem to be very difficult hurdles for any player who was positive and symptomatic to clear. So you're looking at probably 2 to 3 weeks. It is not the case. The COVID list is not the same as the injured reserve list, by which a player has to remain on that list for 3 weeks. They can come off at any time after they get out of isolation, and that is either test or symptom based. And for the reasons we just mentioned, that's going to be a difficult time to hurdle. What we don't know, and what he may be one of the early test cases for, is whether or not a symptomatic player needs to be held out, or if the NFL chooses to hold them out for a little bit longer period of time to watch their cardiac health and whether they can be cleared to return just from a cardiac standpoint. So we'll learn a little bit more about that. But I think what we're hearing this morning, that he's doubtful for next week, is reasonable. And you hope that he recovers quickly enough and that the tests are negative and his symptoms are gone, such that week 6 is possible.
And I think something that people need to remember is, unlike some other kinds of injuries, Gene, there's probably going to be a steeper ramp up on conditioning after a COVID infection, because you're not doing anything, right? I mean, when you're a symptomatic COVID patient, there's no keeping anything up in football shape.
Maybe. I mean, it entirely depends on, some of these COVID infections are not going to be all that much different from other respiratory infections, which, we've seen players recover relatively quickly from those. That happens every year. But because of the nature of COVID, and that it seems evident that maybe there's a little bit more stress on the heart, they may take a little bit longer time to recover. But hard to know without knowing symptoms and without being there and actually being able to examine somebody and know what's going on and know what their pre-existing conditions and complicating factors are. It's really hard to be any more specific than that.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to get at is what you're getting at too, is it injects uncertainty into the situation when we think about the conditioning.
Yeah, it's a day-to-day situation that could easily become week to week. I think that's the best way to describe it. You hope that it's day-to-day. There's good reasons to suspect it'll be day-to-day, but symptoms, testing, recovery are all uncertain until we get on the other side of, okay, our symptoms are improving, and we can start to plan for how carefully we have to watch you and what the follow-up needs to be to get you back on the field.
Okay. Certainly, Gene, I went through my lineups yesterday, and with the exception of one league that is a tight end premium, and I've got Travis Kelce at tight end, and my other options were Mo Alley Cox, which, Trey Burton's back this week, so that's complicated. Gerald Everett, and I think Caden Smith. It's a dynasty league, all right? I didn't have, when the other option is taking maybe 3 or 5 points, I'd rather just take my chances with Kelce and see what happens. But I was doing things like benching Clyde Edwards-Helaire for Antonio Gibson, not Tyreek Hill for Keelan Cole, these kinds of things in the leagues that don't have the conditional player. And there's a whole other larger conversation about which way league should go. If you were smart like Adam Harstad and you saw that conditional players were actually a viable option, not just for COVID, but in years past, and you put it in before the season, simple. You just say, if this game happens, I want my New England Kansas City player. If not, then I want this player. You declare it before the game starts. Some people will put that rule in during this week as a response to that. Some people, I think, validly say, no, it's fantasy football. We're always making decisions based on partial information, and that's just what we do. Now, yesterday, I was saying, except in extreme situations, you're benching your New England and Kansas City players. Just based on what we know about COVID, based on the Tennessee situation, even based on the added little pebble in the scale, Gene, of Jordan Ta'amu playing Cam Newton in practices as the practice squad quarterback for the Chiefs, testing positive. Now, we've got 2 rounds, 1 round for each team, that I believe the tests were conducted yesterday. So we're always lagging a day behind, right? Like when we're getting the results this morning, they're from tests yesterday, but negatives. It's still, but where the rubber meets the road. I feel, now I haven't actually gone through my lineups and weighed each decision. Another thing before we get to the point here is, another thing you can do is, if you can, the other player for your New England or Kansas City player, if it's someone playing this afternoon or tonight or tomorrow night, gives you more time to see how your matchup is going and to see whether you need ceiling of your New England Kansas City option or the floor and safe points of somebody that their game is going to be played. But I find myself now, Gene, maybe even, unless they're closer to coin flip calls, certainly for players like Kelce, Mahomes, Edwards-Helaire, and Hill, on the Kansas City side, feeling more like, well, I think based on the information we have now, I'll probably put my Kansas City players in and let it roll. But what say you?
Yeah, good luck, everybody. That's what I say.
Yeah. Do you have
Okay,
any? I mean, do you have any specific decisions in your lineups on this?
Yeah. But I have, in those leagues, there are contingency plans in place where I can leave them in the lineup, and then even retroactively, if they don't play, I'm going to have the points from folks on the backup. So I've been able to navigate that a little bit easier, which I think is, especially for lots of us that, there's many other things that are going on. We're interested in still playing football and watching the game with a fantasy team in mind. That just makes things easier. But such is the case there. So the NFL has contracted with laboratories such that they have, so there's two different types of tests. There's a point of care test, which is a very quick test that can be run immediately on a machine. And then there are PCR tests that have to be probably sent to a lab. The teams are not traveling with that. So those tests, however, are coming back quicker for the NFL than they are for the general public. So for the most part, the samples that are collected, the results that we're hearing reported are from samples just a matter of hours ago, and sometimes a matter of minutes ago, depending on how many of those point of care machines they have to run everything through. So what we know now is that Newton's test was Friday night. Follow-up testing Friday night into Saturday morning was negative. Follow-up testing Saturday night was negative. And then there's another round in both Kansas City and New England this morning that's negative. The Patriots, in their statement, and the league are clearly more concerned about the possible number of close contacts with Newton and potentially Kansas City than they were with Atlanta last week. So the hope is that what we find here is that the outlier situation is Tennessee, where maybe they weren't following protocols as closely, and that's the reason that they've continued to have tests come positive through the course of the week. This is a definite spreader situation in Tennessee and an outbreak. If New England and Kansas City followed protocols as well as possible, there was lots of masks, lots of distancing. Newton was not symptomatic at any point while he was in close contact with others, then I think there's a reasonable chance that the test will continue to be negative. However, the Titans position coach was positive at some point Saturday, and we did not get additional positive tests until Monday. So this morning is a reassuring sign that nobody is coming positive and that we've not heard of any symptomatic players in the reports. But I do not yet think that we can say with any certainty that any of those close contacts are going to be negative. The NFL clearly wants to play this game on Monday night. There was some indication that Tuesday would be a little bit more likely, but all of the overnight reports and this morning, the players want to play on Monday night. The league wants this on Monday night. If they have another round of tests that are negative tonight, I think they are going to clear the Patriots to travel and then continue to test them. And this is unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, one way or another, this is going to be a test case scenario for some of the questions and the issues that the league has to grapple with here. Exactly how long do you need to go between close contact exposure to trust that the tests are going to continue to be negative and there's not going to be any positives down the line? And the implications of that, are we fairly certain that asymptomatic players, pre-symptomatic players, may not be at risk of transmitting to additional teams? All sorts of things that they're wrestling with. The NFL from the beginning, we saw this with Atlanta last week, and we saw it with Tennessee. They knew that test was positive in Tennessee before they cleared the Titans to travel and play too last week. They approach this season early on with a thought that 48 hours of consecutive, 24 to 48 hours of consecutive negative PCR tests was enough to clear close contact as long as that person was asymptomatic. Tennessee has thrown a wrench into the mix here. So I think that the NFL has widened that window a little bit for another 24 to 48 hours, presumably because there were so many more close contacts with Cam Newton than there was Atlanta's cornerback last week. And we'll see what happens. I think it is wonderful that we've not had any additional positive tests in New England and Kansas City the same. But I still think this goes until this evening, tomorrow morning, before we can be even reasonably confident that this game can be played. I don't think, we're still getting positive tests in Tennessee 5 days after the last assumed in-facility exposure on Sunday night into Monday morning. So we'll see how this goes. So what would I do? I think because the league is showing signs that they want to play, we've going on 40, not quite 48 hours, but we're getting towards 48 hours with multiple negative tests and no new symptomatic folks, that it's looking I think that the number I gave yesterday was 30% because of how that the game would be played by Tuesday night if the tests were negative this morning. Given that we've had a number of sets of tests and the NFL seems highly motivated to make this happen, I think it's probably better than 50-50 at this point. You still have to have a backup plan in place, or at least be willing to you're assuming a risk by putting those folks in your lineup that things could go awry on you tomorrow.
Okay, we're just going to go a few minutes over because this is important. And
they're now saying 7:00 tomorrow.
7 Eastern, 7:05 Eastern start. So, I mean, it sure sounds like everything is going forward. That if nothing changes, and that's the hardest part to gauge, is the chances of something changing. This game is going to go forward. But just to be clear, and I think I almost feel like it doesn't need to be said for our audience, but I think that we are headed towards a more precarious time for coronavirus in this part of the calendar, and communication is key. Clear communication is key. And I don't want to get into anything controversial, Gene, but I you can just say it's like, okay, yes, I agree, or I don't even want to comment on it. But the NFL's approach with these return to play and safety should not be what we as citizens are thinking about when we're exposed, or if we're deciding what's safe and what's not safe in our own activities. Fair?
Yes, that's fair. The current recommendations are, if you are a close contact of someone positive, it does not matter what your test result shows, you are to quarantine for 14 days.
Yes. And then we shouldn't change. We shouldn't look at this as something so, well, that's overreaching. We don't need to do that. I mean, for your safety and the safety of others.
If the data improves and we get reasonable access to accurate testing, maybe we learn that, okay, here is the time frame in which, if you are asymptomatic and you have a couple of negative tests on day 4 and day 5, that we don't consider you at high risk of being an asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic spreader at this point. We are not there yet. I don't know when we will be.
Right.
It's possible that we will be. But yes, right now, what the NFL has chosen to do, and the NFL and the Players Association have agreed to, is to negative tests in asymptomatic folks over X period of time. And you can see that morphing a little bit already. They're allowing games to be played. But that's correct. What is being done in the NFL is different than, in lots of ways, what the well-considered and current recommendations based on best evidence we have for the general population is. And that has everything to do with access to testing, and the protocols that they are trusting have been put in place. And if Tennessee didn't follow, then it is obvious what will happen, both in the general population, in our general public world, and in an NFL bubbled team situation. If we are not following the full extent of every recommendation, if there's a hole in any of them, from masks to distancing to lack of reporting of symptoms or whatever it may be, not quarantining if you know you are a close contact to somebody else. This is what we face with COVID. It's what we face with every respiratory illness, but COVID, for lots of reasons, is different. So that's where we are.
Yeah, and as you've laid out very well, the key data point here is the Tennessee outbreak because they weren't following protocol, or is it just the nature of trying to do this during a pandemic? And at least right now, signs are pointing towards it's more Tennessee dropping the ball there. So more lighthearted, Gene. You're at least part German, right? We've talked about this before. Bramel.
Yes.
Right. Did you know that the Germans are almost obsessive about opening the windows every day and ventilating their house?
I did not know that.
Yeah, I didn't know this either, right? I mean, it's like a thing in the German character. And there's even words for it because, it's German. And of course, this is tying into COVID and good practices because, airing out your house is, ventilation is good. Stossluften is impact ventilation.
Okay.
I can't, but I'm going to botch. I'm going to totally botch, even though my name is Sigmund. I'm Austrian. And
yeah.
Querluften is cross ventilation. Luftwerdünnung and Luftbewegung is air rarefaction and movement. But here's the best, because not everybody in Germany, this is some stuff I found in an article, Guardian article, about Angela Merkel and ventilation and COVID in Germany. So not everybody likes this ventilation thing, because, Gene, they even do this, like open the windows at least once or twice a day in the winter, right? So the saying is, Erfroren sind schon viel, erstucken ist noch keiner. which means many people have frozen to death, but no one has ever died from a bad smell.
Dankeschön.
So, open the windows, get some fresh air. I know in New Orleans, the summer is finally gone, and it's nice to have the windows open. It's always a breath of fresh air to spend time with Dr. Gene, with Mitch Carl. We'll have Jason Wood next week. Enjoy week 4, everybody. Stay safe out there. We love you. We want to continue to spend time together for as long as we can because you're so classy.